My name is Fred Manget, full name Frederick Fairfield Manget. I'm 73 years old this year in 2024, and I'm being taped and video recorded by my beautiful, talented oldest child, Felice Manget Harvey. I have a lot of stuff that I've inherited down through the years and kept from my family. I'm sort of an unofficial family historian and archivist, and I've asked her as a present for Christmas to go around this room, which is at our home at 905 Arbordale Avenue in High Point, where we've been for about 6 years, and explain really everything that's here that's significant and what stories I can remember about them. There's a comprehensive bunch of notebooks and photographs and scrapbooks that I have put together as a family historian, and I'm not going to go into that detail, but they are here in this room as well and available for any of the family or descendants or interested people from the neighborhood to look through. Felice and I are standing in the bar room at our home at Arbordale Avenue in High Point, and there's no chronological or any other pattern to what I'm showing. It just happens to be what wall we're on. We're going to circulate around, and I'm going to mention a few things and try and remember some stories. One of the ones I wanted to show is this watercolor, which was done by my cousin, Betty Lockhart Anglin, who was a professor of art at Newport News, Christopher Newport University. It's a picture of a house that my grandfather, Manget Fairfield Sr., owned in Dunedin, Florida, and it was called Fleet's Inn. And we went down to Fleet's Inn when I was a little boy several times. It was a funny little Florida house with no air conditioning, no television, no radio, not much of anything except it was on the water. There was no beach, there was a little dock, and there was an island across the sound that we used to go to called Hog Island. Now I think it's known as Caladese State Park, as I remember. But we used to get a little tiny boat that had a 2.5 horsepower motor, outboard motor, and putter across there with my mom and dad and 2 younger brothers. One time, the memories that we had at Fleet's Inn was it was raining, and when it was raining in Florida, there was nothing to do, and there were 3 little boys driving my mother crazy. So Dad rounded us up, put us in the car, drove to Clearwater, and went to see a movie, The Guns of Navarone. Great war movie, one of my favorites still. And it was so good, and the rain was still falling, we got to sit through it twice. If you come around to the right, there's a picture of a cardinal, which is one of my favorite birds, even a totem of me, a bright bird sitting on a branch. It was given to me by my brother Tom Manget. It was by Sidney Bagshaw, who was an artist in St. Lucia, who did textile art pictures. This is a textile tapestry. And the reason it was in St. Lucia is my brother was dating at the time his and soon-to-be wife and still wife, Debbie Stewart Manget, and she was in the Peace Corps in St. Lucia. And we always used to tease her because St. Lucia is a vacation place that people pay thousands of dollars to go to. But this was a long time ago. But again, it wasn't exactly sub-Saharan Africa. Down below this is a photograph compilation of composite of me and friends of mine from when I was at Oxford. I went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar in 1973. And these folks are roommates and great friends to this day. I roomed with Peter Gross, who is a retired High Court and Court of Appeals judge, and Sean Day, who sadly has passed away, but was the chief executive officer and then chairman of the board of a big, giant Norwegian bulk carrier shipping line called TK. This is my friend Mike Haskins, who is a vice admiral in the U.S. Navy and inspector general of the United States Navy. And some pictures early and late of when we have seen them and when I was at Oxford with Peter. Here we are dressed in something called subfusk, which is what you had to wear if you went to dinner at the formal part of the college dining every evening or to take an exam. Below that is a painting done by an old friend of mine from Georgia who came through Oxford to visit, Ann Williams, who was an artist and who painted a watercolor of my college, Oriel College there. below that, Felice, if you can pick that up, I just have a poster of one of the interesting things that's always intrigued me, and that's the deep space field photograph that the Hubble Space Telescope took a number of years ago. It used to be on Felice's wall when we lived in Northern Virginia. And it's marvelous. Each bit of light in this photograph is a galaxy of 100 billion stars. So an inspiration about what we know about the universe. And all my interest in cosmology and the astronomical history and fate of the universe is all reflected in what we've been able in my lifetime to find out about the universe. Yes, we had some adventures in stargazing, including a trip to New Mexico, where we were out in the clear, dry desert air visiting my uncle Bruce Black and his wife, my aunt Manget Black. And we went out, and the stars were so thick you could barely tell the constellations. You could see satellites passing over very clearly. But at Marsh Court, we put stars that had glows on the ceilings of the kids' bedrooms. And we also, because I was fascinated with the sky and the stars and the Earth as well, we pasted National Geographic maps to the walls of Felice's bedroom. And there were two comets that came. There was Comet Hale-Bopp and Comet Hyakutake that we could see from that latitude in Northern Virginia. And so those were two prominent comets that came up when the children were growing up that morning. One of my heroes, in fact probably the most heroic of all my heroes, was my father, Henry Fairfield Manget Jr., always known as Doc Manget. He was a Navy pilot in both World War II and the Korean War, and I've inherited a number of things that I'll mention as we go through the videotape, but some of the ones are here on this shelf. These are airplane models of airplanes that Dad flew in both wars. This is a picture of Dad when he was a naval cadet. He was 20 years old. He just turned 20 on December 6th, 1941, the day before Pearl Harbor. He was an aviation cadet in the Atlanta and Chambly Naval Air Station right outside of Atlanta, and then went to World War II, became a torpedo bomber pilot, and then in the Korean War he was called up and became a fighter pilot. These are planes that he flew. This is a Cougar jet with the swept wings. This is the one that he spent most of his time in. It's a F-9F Panther jet. He was with, in the Korean War, VF-72, Fighter Squadron 72, as the executive officer. He also, before the war, would fly this, which is the F-8 Bearcat plane, the last of the great Navy carrier planes that were piston-driven propeller. This was a Corsair that he flew also. He was in squadrons that would ferry aircraft back and forth from the East Coast to the West Coast. So all these aircraft he had flown in. This is a Banshee, one of the earlier planes. And this is a model from World War II. It's a model of a Japanese bomber. They used these models to train pilots into recognizing the enemy aircraft. I have a lot of books, which I won't describe, that would take months and months, but many of them I loved and saved most of the ones that I thought I might read again. Down here, there's a model of the fighter plane, the F-6F Hellcat, which was part of the fighter squadron in Dad's aircraft carrier. We'll get to that story when we cross around here in a bit. This is a die-cast model of his aircraft carrier, the Princeton, sunk at Lady Gulf. These are things from me, these tiny things in the corner. This is a rock from the Khyber Pass between India and Afghanistan. And this is a Pashtul cap that the Tajiks would wear in northern Afghanistan during the part of the time that CIA was actively there and supporting people right after the 9/11 attacks. I had a friend that went to Afghanistan from CIA, and which is where I worked and where we'll talk about in a little while. And he brought these back for me as souvenirs from the Khyber Pass and from the Ahmed Shah Massoud Tajiks in the north, which were supported by the agency. This is a cork from Champagne, marked 2011, May 1st, 2011, which is when Osama bin Laden was killed by Navy SEALs in Pakistan. I worked for the Counter-Terrorist Center for a couple of years as their legal advisor, and we were after bin Laden even before 9/11. These are pictures of my mother at Lake Burton, our lake house. This is a picture of my son, John Thomas, Felice's brother, who played golf. This is a picture of him looking studious on the golf course. We are big Star Wars fans, so all around we have small models of Star Wars figurines, and here is a Millennium Falcon. This is a carved bear that my father brought back from Japan. This is a unit citation of the Ames counterintelligence team, which I was on at CIA. Aldrich Ames was a Russian spy who had been betraying Russian assets at the agency for a number of years, and we caught him and put him in prison for life without imprisonment, without parole. And this was a citation that the director gave to the team that did that. Down here we have Mom, Leslie Manget, ladies club champion at Bent Tree. Mom and I took up golf about the time that JT took it up in high school, and it was something we could do together and do with him, and she turned out to be much better than I was. And this is an ashtray from the Bonhomme Richard, the new Bonhomme Richard. Bonhomme Richard was the name, of course, of John Paul Jones's ship in the Revolutionary War, but that was the name of Dad's carrier in the Korean War, and he was a guest on the new Bonhomme Richard that replaced the one that he served on in VF-72. We're now at the second wall in the bar room, and this is the portrait gallery above the fireplace. We started with the painting up here. This is a painting of my father's aircraft, which he had named the Rambling Rebel, based upon his southern roots, that he flew in on the Bonhomme Richard in the Korean War when he was executive officer of Fighting Squadron 72. It was painted by my uncle, Bruce Black, who married my mother's sister. As I mentioned before, Bruce was a naval reservist, as was my father. They were both reservists, never regular Navy. Bruce was in naval intelligence and stayed in for a long time and rose up through the ranks and became a two-star admiral, a rear admiral, and commanded the Naval Intelligence Reserve Command. He was a petroleum geologist in northern New Mexico, Farmington, New Mexico. And he's one of the most interesting characters that we ever knew or even ever married into the family. He painted this. He was a very good painter and drawer, and used to do freelance pictures for people, and he did this for my father because he was a great admirer of Dad and his naval service. These photographs are all family and distant, near and distant. This is a picture of my grandfather, Tom Watkins. We call him Papa. These small pictures are of my grandmother. They're from a photo album. There's another picture we'll show you of her later on. He was a very interesting character himself. He was a graduate of Georgia Tech and went into accounting, worked for a firm called Richardson and Jackson in Decatur, but stayed in the military reserves. His branch was coastal artillery. He had joined it at Georgia Tech, and he used to go up to Fort Monroe every summer and do his training tour. And then during World War II, he was called to active duty and spent time stationed in Fort Bliss mainly. But he became an Army controller, somebody who signed the checks and kept track of the money flows, stationed most of the time at Fort Bliss near El Paso. But he liked the Army so much, he stayed on active duty for a full 20 years and then went to work for the Army Audit Agency in Atlanta. His most interesting tour, though, and what we'll get to in the next room, he spent 2.5 years stationed in Japan after the end of the war with the 8th Army occupying Japan, and brought all kinds of interesting Japanese artifacts that we'll mention in the next room. He just fell in love with Japanese artistry and the history of Japanese art. Next picture is of my blushing bride, Leslie Black Manget, Felice's mom. There's a small picture here of her when she was born. She was so small at the time, 1956, they were really worried about her surviving. She weighed, I think, 3 pounds. And she was called a prissy because the black lady who took care of her was so impressed with how precise and ladylike she was, even as a little tiny baby. Leslie's dad was a career Army officer. We'll come to a picture of his over here. He was a pilot. He was a helicopter and fixed-wing pilot, also Corps of Engineers and the Transportation Corps. Worked for 32 years, active duty Army, retired as a colonel. This is Leslie's picture when she was in, I think, about the first or second year in college at Berry College, North Georgia. This is a picture of Leslie looking at swans in Oxford, where we got engaged in 1981. We were over there on a fun trip, vacation trip. And when we walked down in Christchurch Meadow down to the river, there were these 2 swans that came over thinking we looked like an easy mark for food. And Leslie went down to look at them, and I thought, you know, there's probably not a better time to ask her to marry me. So I did, and she did. And things took off from there. Miracles happened, and Felice and her sister Caroline and her brother John Thomas came along. This is Leslie's mom and dad, Charles and Joy, and that's Felice with the great hair. That's Caroline, and that's JT, John Thomas, right after he was born, 1989. These are pictures of my mother and father at Lake Burton, our place up in North Georgia that we've been for many years. I'll bring it out so you can see it. Also with the kids, a little older time. This is Felice, Caroline, and John Thomas in front of the little cabin that was built in 1949, I believe, and is still there. The next picture is my mother, Toy Manget. Her full name was May McCoy Watkins, but she was always known as Toy. And this is a picture of her when she was about 17, but she was a very glamorous, beautiful lady. This is Dad when he came up to visit us when we lived at Marsh Court in Virginia, and he and I went down to see the Korean War Memorial down on the mall, which is right near the Vietnam Memorial. And in the background, there is a bas-relief of carvings into this reflective granite wall there of pictures of people that served in Korea, including over here a naval combat pilot. This is Dad in front of the Rambling Rebel, number 209, on the Bonhomme Richard. This is a picture of my father and I when I was about 2 years old, possibly. He was a test pilot with the Navy in St. Louis with the McDonnell Douglas aircraft manufacturing company for a couple of years before he got out of active duty. These are pictures of the kids with locks of hair. Felice, Caroline, John Thomas. This is a picture of Leslie meeting Queen Elizabeth. Leslie is in the hot pink dress here. Queen Elizabeth is in the yellow here. This was a reception at Rhodes House in 1982. We went over for the 80th reunion that the Rhodes Trust put on, and the Queen came and visited, shook hands with Prince Philip. It's quite an interesting time. This was a picture of Leslie's dad, Charles, when he was first enlisted in the Army. And this is a picture of me and my 2 brothers, Thomas Watkins Manget, and John Edward Manget up at Lake Burton, our place up in North Georgia. This is a picture of my brothers and I with my great-great-uncle, who was a very famous Methodist missionary doctor in China. who was credited with the coining of the phrase, "God is my co-pilot." His name was Fred Manget. He's one of the Freds I was named for, and he was born in 1880 and lived till 1979. He died at the age of 99. And when he was there, he treated the American volunteer group, the Flying Tigers, and then the 14th Air Force. And there was a combat pilot there, an ace, whose name was Robert Scott, Bob Scott, from Macon, Georgia. And the story is, and you can see this in the book that Bob Scott wrote called "God is My Co-Pilot," about how he was inspired to name his book after that, after a conversation with Dr. Fred Manget, who was picking pieces of metal out of his back where a Japanese cannon shell had put splinters when it hit right behind his plane in World War II. And the story is the big Chinese intern asked Bob Scott to take his mind off the pain. "Sir, are you up there by yourself in the plane, shooting the guns and flying the plane and working the rudder?" And Uncle Fred supposedly said, "No, son, you're not up there alone. You got the greatest co-pilot in the world up there." And so he used that phrase, wrote the book, and made a Hollywood movie out of it. It was a best-selling book. So that was Uncle Fred's contribution to the Manget fame. Here is a wall with a bunch of diplomas and stuff there. I went to the University of Georgia. This is my Georgia diploma. I studied very hard at Georgia, so I got a cool diploma with honors and medals and whatnot. Leslie's diploma is from Berry College. She was an art education major. For some reason, she has a Bachelor of Science degree. I was a political science major, and I have a Bachelor of Arts degree. We don't know why to this day, but that's our academic records. These are pictures of my college at Oxford, Oriel College, one of the older colleges. It was founded in 1326. This is a picture of my class of Rhodes Scholars. There's really fascinating people that were in here, including one of my roommates, Sir Peter Gross, and others.
What's really fascinating about that picture is seeing Dad with sideburns.
Sideburns and long hair.
That's what's really fascinating about that picture.
Yeah, and most everybody else did too. Really,
blends in really well.
Yeah, it was very fashionable back in, this was of course 73, 74, 75, so long hair was quite in, and beards and whatnot. This is, I went to law school at Vanderbilt University. I was a Patrick Wilson Scholar there, which is a great scholarship Vanderbilt has, a wonderful law school.
Where did you live in Vanderbilt?
Well, we lived in a big house it was called by the law students Mayo Mansion. It belonged to a Vanderbilt English professor, and it had 7 bedrooms and 2 kitchens, and it was passed down from class to class at the law school. And I was known, we all had nicknames. Because I had been there for 2 years in the house and had rounded up people in my class, I was known as Captain Mayo, because I was the older guy there, and we had a number of other people who become successful, prominent attorneys in Nashville and other places that I've kept up with.
Do you remember your roommates' nicknames? Yes,
we had Pete Ezel was actually the oldest by age there, and he was known as Pappy. We had the Golden Boy was one, the Pledge was one. We had another fellow named Ken Stewart who was known as the Professor because he was smarter than everybody else. He had been a accounting business major and knew the answers in the class when you had to stand up and present a case to the teacher. We had the Grove Hill Flash, who was a real nice guy, Bruce Wilson from Grove Hill, Alabama, a little bitty tiny town in southern Alabama. We had a good time there together, and we've had some virtual reunions since then and told stories about each other. This is the interesting story. This is my Oxford degree. I went to Oxford and read a course called Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, PPE, which was designed about 100 and so years ago for people that were going into civil service, teach people how to do government. And many of us took that course. Everybody there in my class had at least a 4-year U.S. university degree of some type. So a lot of us went there and just read this is an undergraduate degree. The Oxford degree is a 3-year degree, and they usually start a year later, and the rigor of the courses are a little bit higher than a normal 4-year degree. They don't have degrees that require a lot of core curriculum. You didn't have to take, a bunch of math and science. You just specialized immediately. And at the end of the 2 or 3 years, you would take 8 3-hour exams where you walk into a big hall with everybody else there taking the exam for PP&E, and you would be handed a booklet, and I have them in some notebooks here, the actual booklets that I had, and you pick out of about 10 subjects, you could pick 4. And for 3 hours you wrote on these essay questions in little blue books. And the examiners looked at it, and they would pass you or give you a second degree honors, which most of us took. Some of the very smart kids got a first degree in whatever they were taking. So I took that. But the great thing about the Oxford BA is that after 5 years of being awarded the BA, if you sent them something like 7.5 pounds, it became a Master of Arts. So I have a Master of Arts. And when you're listed on your resume or your alumni, what did I do in school? You listed MA, and then in parentheses you put OXON, Oxonian, to show that it's called the Magical Masters. So the funny story about that.
Do you remember what your topics were that you chose to write on?
Oh yeah. You took 8 courses when you were doing PP&E over the course of 2 years, and each course was an 8-week writing of an essay about topics that your tutor gave you. My tutor was a fellow named Christopher Seton Watson, Seton-Watson, double-barreled English name. And he was probably the world's greatest authority in English about Italian fascism. And he taught me and Mike Haskins. He was our tutor for politics. And his father was a very senior civil servant who was instrumental in creating the country of Czechoslovakia after World War I. And Christopher's brother, Hugh Seton Watson, was a very prominent historian. It's a very, very prominent English family. Christopher had been an artillery officer in Italy during World War II. Fascinating fellow, and we would go in there once a week and read an essay that we wrote from assignment the week before. And I took everything from international relations to political theory, political philosophy, Western European politics, political institutions, that sort of thing. I had majored in political science, so I had a background there, and came out with a respectable second degree. The 8-week terms, there were three terms, and when you had breaks between the terms, the breaks were 4 weeks long, plus a long break during the summer. So you're supposed to take your books and go read and become wise, thinking about your essays. It was a very unique experience, especially the tutorials.
Did the exam format of choosing topics and writing for 3 hours, did that have any influence on you being an educator in your future?
Not really. The only thing that I remember from those and in fact all my undergraduate years at Georgia was I could write well and I worked really hard. So the economics courses that I'd never heard of economics, had no idea about economics when I arrived at Oxford, and I was so bad that the economics don at Oxford, who was the tutor for people who'd never read an economics book in their lives, took me and Mike Haskins, my Navy Admiral friend, took us under his wing to teach us. So I went and got they had copies of all of the previous economics questions. And I had 3 courses in economics: macroeconomics, microeconomics, and international economics. And so I went and studied the earlier questions, and I found out from those that there were only certain there weren't infinite topics that you could write about, that you could ask to be written about in a 3-hour exam. So I broke those down and I said, I'm going to study to the kinds of topics that they ask. And so I can adapt, and basically they would write the same question on the topic, just in a different form. So I studied all that and did very well in economics.
Sounds very resourceful.
The funny thing about economics was, which I knew nothing about, is I studied so hard for that I almost got a first class invitation to come back and talk to the Dons to qualify for a first class in economics, which would have been just wackadoodle. And it's called a viva voce, and you had to stay around in the summer after you took the exams, because if you were right on the edge of getting a first or a second degree, you had to come back and they wanted to check and see if you're really as smart as your essay test. I didn't have to do that, but the tutor, the tutor at Oriel who sent me the results said you were very strong in economics. He said you almost got viva for a first in economics. So that would have been quite the joke, because I already had a summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa degree in politics. This is the bar in the bar room, and there's a story behind it that I love. We've brought this bar with us all the way from my parents' house at 2562 Wajilia Road in Northeast Atlanta, DeKalb County. And the story behind this bar is, in 1959, my father was the assistant manager of the El Paso International Airport. He had been in the Navy until about 1955 or 6, and then was after the Korean War and after his service as a test pilot in St. Louis, he tried to get into the regular Navy, but they were reducing in force so much he just was unsuccessful. So he stayed in the Naval Reserves, and then he got a job as the assistant manager in El Paso because my grandfather, Tom Watkins, was stationed at Fort Bliss and heard that they were looking for an assistant manager at the airport. So that's how we ended up in El Paso, where my youngest brother, John, was born. And after a few years there, Dad heard from his family, who all were from Decatur and that greater Atlanta area, that the Navy was turning over the Chamblee Naval Air Station to DeKalb County to make it a general aviation airport. And in fact, Chamblee Naval Air Station was where Dad first soloed in an airplane when he was an aviation cadet. So he sent his resume in and they hired him to come and take over from the Navy and develop this airport. And when he arrived there, the entire airport, which is now DeKalb Peachtree Airport, or PDK, there was nothing there but old Navy buildings. And the first day on his job, he had a desk that was made out of a packing crate. Now, the airport, since that time, became a very large, successful, sophisticated general aviation airport, well known around the country. But at the time, it was in the process of tearing down all the old Navy buildings and building new fixed base operator hangars and other things. And about in early 1960s, they'd finally gotten around to tearing down the building where the old Officers Club was. And in the Officers Club was this nice long oaken bar. And they brought in the backhoe and the trucks and were tearing it apart. And Dad went over there and asked them, what are you all going to do with the bar? And they said, we'll just take it to the dump. And he said, can I take pieces of it? And they said, sure, it's just going to be out on the curb. So he got a truck, cut the bar in half, it's cut here, and brought it back to their house in Wajilia Road and put it down in the basement there. And I remember helping him put it together and sand it and help him put a coat of varnish on it. After they passed away and the house was sold, I said, I want to keep the bar. So we brought it from Wajilia Road to our house in Virginia on Marsh Court. From there, we brought it to our house in Bent Tree, about an hour north of Atlanta, in Jasper, Georgia, Pickens County. And from there, we brought it here to High Point. And it's still in good use, as you can see. We're all off to the next wall, which has a lot of pictures. Some of me, I have a friend, Denny Grundy, who's a retired Marine Corps F-18 fighter pilot, who came to visit one time a year or two ago and called this the I Love Me room. He says, we all have I Love Me rooms. So I'm up here on this, but I'm also up here with some of the other military connected and career folks from the family. Over here, this is my grandfather, Henry Fairfield Manget Sr. He was commissioned briefly into the coastal artillery right around the time that the U.S. entered World War I. And there was a call up of folks to join the military, and that's a picture of him in his uniform. We called him Granddad. He was a very interesting fellow. He ended up, after a number of unsuccessful businesses in the 20s and 30s, with my dad and my dad's two younger brothers. He ended up with a laundry business over near the western part of the greater Atlanta area called Domestic Laundry. And he and my two uncles worked there for a long time. And they used to do the laundry for everybody from the Salvation Army to Eastern Airlines. It was mostly a commercial laundry. And that's a picture of him when he was probably about 22 or 23 years old. Above him is a photograph of my great uncle Fred Manget, Alfred Prosper Manget, who was the missionary doctor in China. I have notebooks here with clippings and other information, which I won't go into, about his career. He was a very interesting person. 99 years of fascinating service to God. He was quite a devout Methodist, but also a very accomplished doctor. This is a picture of him as a lieutenant colonel in the public health service in the United States right after World War I, when he was called up to go to Siberia because there was a cholera outbreak in a prisoner of war camp there, where Czech soldiers from the soon-to-be the future Czechoslovakia were being held in a POW compound, and he and a Red Cross team went to Siberia to doctor them. And he had, in thanks, he had been awarded a medal by the president of Czechoslovakia, who I believe was, at the time, was Jan Masaryk. But that's his picture of him in his public service uniform, so he had that connection with the military. This is a picture of Leslie's dad. You can see his face. This is a picture of Charles Samuel Black, who was a Army colonel, 32 years of Army service, including some in World War II. And I also have a notebook with his military story too. It's fascinating. Charles was a great guy. The other things are pictures of me. This is a picture of me in my military uniform. I'm a retired Army JAG colonel. From the time I was commissioned in 1973 till the time I retired, which is this document here, was 38 years. I went through Georgia on an Air Force ROTC scholarship and was a distinguished graduate in the Air Force, but switched over after I went to law school and practiced for a while to the Army JAG Corps with a direct commission, and spent the next 22 years as an Army Reserve JAG officer, retired as a colonel in 2011. Below that's a picture of me. I was the Deputy General Counsel at CIA and a bunch of other positions. This is a picture of the last promotion that the director's handing me my promotion certificate, George Tenet. This is my official CIA portrait with flags and background. Above that is a plaque I got from the Counter-Terrorist Center. I worked for Cofer Black and Hank Crumpton, who were both counter-terrorist ambassadors later in their careers, but I had 2 years there while they were going after Osama bin Laden before 9/11, and they gave me this nice plaque. You don't get paid much in the government, but they do give you nice plaques and certificates. But this picture here is a pen and ink drawing that my wife Leslie, Felice's mom, did for me. It's from Grant Park in the cemetery right outside Atlanta, and it's a monument to the unknown Confederate dead. One of my ancestors on the Manget side, my great-great-grandfather, Victor Eugene Manget fought in the Civil War as a captain of Company B of the Georgia Military Institute Cadets, and actually was captured the last year of the war and went to a Union prisoner of war camp. So I've always been fascinated by the Civil War. And many of my books here are about Civil War battles and the war itself. But Leslie did this. This is actually a reproduction of a lion dying that is in Switzerland, that was part of a monument to the Swiss Guard that were wiped out completely wiped out when defending one of the popes. They were mercenaries. They were defending one of the popes in one of the never-ending wars, and they had a monument of the dying lion, which is in, I believe, in Zurich. And anyway, it's a reproduction of those in the Confederate, unknown Confederate dead that Leslie drew. Leslie's a very good artist. The last on the bar side is this Lego model of the International Space Station, catering to my fascination with things outer space, given to me by my delightful son-in-law, who is a Lego master, Dr. Professor Brent Harvey, Felice's husband, and I put it together with some advice from him. On to the next wall. I wanted to start with one of Leslie's accomplishments. This cup is recognition that she was the first runner-up in the Miss Berry College contest. As I mentioned before, she went there and still kept up with all of her friends, and coincidentally, before we even met or started dating, she knew my youngest brother John, who also went to Berry College. Anyway, we were very proud of her, not only being talented, but beautiful as well. This beret is one of the goofy things that happened with Army uniforms when I was in the Army. Somebody decided that not just the paratroopers should wear berets, but everybody should, even the overweight JAG officers. So I had to figure out how to wear this beret. And this is my Air Force captain's hat that I had when I switched over to the JAG Corps. This is a award sort of trophy. It was the Attorney General of the United States Distinguished Service Award that I got for some of the counter-terrorist activities that I assisted. A very, very high award for the U.S. government. This is a flag that flew over the agency headquarters that they give to people when they retire after a number of years. And I have various books and whatnot, and memorabilia here, lots of books. Let's see, the next shelf down. This is a bottle burqa that one of my Arab counter-terrorist people gave to me. That counter-terrorist people. This is what Arabs who are forbidden alcohol in the Quran, and if they are observant, they don't drink alcohol. If they're not observant and they have any booze in their houses or hotel rooms or whatnot, they evidently have this bottle burqa. They just put that over the alcohol bottle like that, and it hides it from any devout visitors who might be mortally offended. So anyway, he gave me one of those to put over my bottle, just to this is some retirement things from CIA. One thing, let's see. Oh, this is a plaque showing one of my attempts to not be just a dull lawyer. Before I went to the agency, I was in private practice in Atlanta for a number of years, and during that time I said, I don't really like law practice. I'm going to become a thriller writer. So I started writing and doing some poetry and short stories and whatnot. And there was a contest put on in Hannibal, Missouri, Mark Twain's hometown, called the Mark Twain Sesquicentennial Short Fiction Prize. And you would be published in a literary review called the Clockwatch Review. So I wrote a story, sent it in, and sure enough, I won. And at the time, this was a few months after Felice was born in 1985. And they invited me to come out to Hannibal for the laying on of hands. They were having a conference at a college there in Hannibal. And so I went out there for a couple of nights, and they gave me this nice plaque and $1,000, which was very respectable for, you know, freelance writing. So anyway, I liked it very much. And they had a guy do this cover, which is on the cover of the Clockwatch Review where the story was published. And I've got a copy of it around here. So, the story that I wrote for the sesquicentennial 150th anniversary of his birth, the short fiction prize was called Trajectory.
And what was it about?
Well, it was about, it's hard to describe. It was something, I mean, the criteria for the prize was write something in the spirit, something like Mark Twain would have written, like the famous jumping frog, Calaveras County. So I had read a story about a meteor that had come out and hit a mailbox down in Claxton, Georgia, which is down in the south part of Georgia. And it had hit the earth and blown up some mailbox. It was a newspaper story, true story. So I was thinking about that, and I turned it into a story about a sort of a handicapped handyman who did odd jobs and lived in a shack on the edge of town, of a little southern town, and how a meteor came out and hit his mailbox in front of his little shack on the side of town. And he was kind of a simple person that you see in many sort of southern Gothic stories. This wasn't a Gothic story because there were a couple of guys in the town who like to pull practical jokes on things. A couple of, you know, guys that, let's play a trick on this guy. His name was Haimoti. So they snuck up behind his house and they lit a ball of pitch, which is very combustible, you know, stuff like tar. They lit it and they flung it up in the air like another meteor, because this guy Haimoti was so taken with this meteor coming out, he would sit out on his front porch and watch the sky. And so they made this pitch and they threw it up in the air just to play a trick on him, only the wind caught it and brought it back down and hit his shack and set it on fire and burned it to the ground. Well, this story turned out okay, because Haimoti, these guys felt so bad about it. One of them worked in a mobile home factory down in this little town in South Georgia, that everybody got together because he was kind of a handyman that people liked. He'd come and do odd jobs for people. They got him a new double wide trailer to live in. And the story ends with him sitting there and thinking about, you know, what might come out of the sky and bless him. So anyway, that's the story in a nutshell. And I've got a copy if you want to read it. It's around here somewhere. In fact, there it is right there.
So,
and I love the painting on the front. That's Sam Clemens and Mark Twain. He wrote about the river. And Tom Sawyer, and that's the jumping frog of Calaveras County. And there's the story.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And I wrote I won some minor poetry contests where they'd send you a book of poetry or something as a prize.
That's my dad being humble. He's a very, very great writer, especially of poetry.
No. My modesty is not false at all. Somebody said it's good that you're modest because you have so much to be modest about. And I think that's about it. There's some other sort of things here. Some old album covers, Guns of Navarone, and Gunfighter Ballads. Marty Robbins, this came out in the 60s. He was a country western singer, and these are Gunfighter Ballads that had the two most favorite songs that my dad and I loved forever, that my cousins are all musicians and my nephews are all musicians, still sing when they get together. One of them is El Paso, and the other one is Big Iron, which is my favorite. This is a picture of me. I'm making sure y'all can identify all this. This is a picture of me in my Georgia Tech letter sweater with golf clubs. This must have been about 1955, maybe I was about 4 years old. Taken near where my Manget grandparents lived at 172 Erie Avenue in Decatur. and I don't know where the golf clubs came from, but we've let my wife and I and Felice have really loved playing golf since then. This wall has some prints that were on the wall of my mom and dad's house at Waigelia Road in Atlanta that I inherited. My brothers and I split them all up, and the house was sold after Mom had passed away. The top is a picture of Dad's aircraft in World War II. He was a torpedo bomber pilot in a torpedo squadron on the Swanee for a while, but then on the Princeton. And this is the Princeton, which was a fast attack carrier, a CVL, a light carrier. It was built on the hull of a cruiser, and it was fast enough to keep up with the large CVE aircraft carriers. Its only difference was it was smaller and had two squadrons. It had a squadron of torpedo bombers and a fighter squadron. The big carriers had three squadrons. They typically had a dive bomber, a torpedo bomber, and a fighter squadron on them. But the light carriers and Independence class carriers were part of the Great Fleet, the Great Task Force that was commanded by alternately Raymond Spruance and Bill Halsey. And the great carrier Admiral Mark Mitcher was the commander that was in charge of the vast fleet at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Dad participated in several battles. The two biggest ones were the Battle of the Philippine Sea in the summer of 1944, and then at Leyte Gulf, which historians have chronicled as the largest naval battle in history, measured by number of ships and personnel and expanse of the battle field itself. And it had to do with the liberation of the Philippines. Leyte Gulf is a gulf near Leyte Island in the middle of the Philippine archipelago. And in October of 1944, the Dad's squadron, the fighter squadron, sister's fighter squadron, and Dad's torpedo bomber squadron were on the Princeton. And the first day of the battle, on the 24th, a Japanese land-based bomber came out of the clouds, avoided the combat air patrol, and put a 500-pound bomb right here that went through the flight deck, which is what the aircraft land and take off on, into the hangar deck where the aircraft are stored. Where the aircraft is stored also has a lot of very flammable stuff like aviation gas and bombs and torpedoes. And the ship began to burn, and it burned, and the flames got so bad that the skipper of the ship called abandoned ship. So Dad and his squadron mates went down over the side of the Princeton on fire hoses into the water. And Dad and his squadron mates were in life rafts floating around while the firefighters remained on the ship and were trying to put out the fires. The people that had abandoned ship were picked up by destroyers and by the cruiser, the Birmingham. And the Birmingham pulled next to the Princeton to use the fire hoses of the Birmingham on the Princeton's fires. And they had hundreds of the Princeton sailors who hadn't stayed behind on the ship to fight the fires, sitting outside on the decks of the Birmingham while their fire crew were playing the water all over the fires on the Princeton. And there was suddenly a massive explosion, probably triggered by torpedoes going off on the Princeton, that sprayed shrapnel all over and killed dozens and dozens of the Princeton sailors that were on the Birmingham. Dad and his squadron mates, fortunately, were floating around in rafts. And Dad tells a story about he was hanging on the side of the raft, which was full of his shipmates, and one of the chief petty officers who was in there said, "Sir, get in the raft." And they said, "No, it's full. I can hang on here for a while." He said, "No, sir, get in the raft." And he pointed over there, and there was a shark's fin circling the raft. And so he and another raft linked arms and floated around for a while, and then finally were picked up by a destroyer, the Irvin, and later were transferred to the Lexington. This is a picture taken by a Navy official photographer of Dad sitting on the Lexington, the big carrier that took all the survivors of the Princeton. The Princeton exploded and the rest of the ship's company abandoned it, and it was finally sunk by torpedoes from a couple of the destroyers. Now this is a picture of Dad with his hand bandaged from probably holding on to that other raft. He was 22 years old. Dad's second war was the Korean War. He was called back to active duty in 1951 and stationed at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where I was born. He and Mom had gotten married in 1947. And he was training in the switch from Navy prop planes to jets. And he had at his house in Wagelia Road, he had these prints from Grumman. This is the F-9F Panther jet that was his main aircraft that he flew in the Korean War. And it's one of the ones that we had the model and the painting that Bruce Black did. And this is a later version called the Cougar jet. This is a picture above a carrier very much like his carrier, the Bonhomme Richard, and we'll show you a print over here of the actual Bonhomme Richard, one of the straight deck carriers that were still in operation during the Korean War. On my first birthday in 1952, Dad was still on his cruise, and he sent a mimeographed press release from the Navy to my mother, and down at the bottom he wrote, "This is what I was doing on Freddie's first birthday, 1952, October 14th. And it's a description about Lieutenant Commander Manget from Decatur, Georgia, leading a flight attacking targets in North Korea, anti-aircraft emplacements and bridges." And we have a copy of the mimeographed press release that mentions what he was doing on my first birthday. and he returned fine. There was a great movie made about Navy operations by Navy combat pilots who were reservists called The Bridge at Tokori, based on a book by James Michener, and starring William Holden, who my dad resembled in later life when Holden was in later life as well. So we always have a soft spot in our hearts for that movie about Navy reserve aviators in the Korean War. This wall has a number of other things related to Dad's military career that I inherited. He made friends with a lot of aviation buffs and pilots and whatnot in Atlanta, and one of the friends that he made was a fellow that does combat art, who's a very well-known combat artist named Sam Lyons, who did this print called Evening Return, and it is the actual aircraft carrier, CVE-31, which is the Bonhomme Richard where Dad flew. These are F-4U Corsairs that were used in the Korean War briefly, but down here on the flight deck of the Bonhomme Richard, there are the F-9F Panther jets, which is what Dad was flying, and if you look really, really close, the one in the middle is 209, which was Dad's aircraft, so he put that in there in sort of tribute to Dad. These are actual Atlanta newspapers, not reproductions, but the actual newspapers that my grandmother, Dad's mom, Doreen Ingram Manget, saved about the Battle of Lady Gulf. This one you can see notifies the reading public that there was an American light flat top lost in three-pronged fight. That was the Princeton. And then this is a clipping with the picture of Dad and his aviation togs with his white scarf that says Lieutenant survives sinking at Princeton, and that's Dad. So I think when my grandparents saw the Princeton had been sunk, they probably just were frightened to death. But the Navy was very good about letting people know who had survived. There were a lot of deaths on the Princeton, though, a lot of them, especially the ones that were picked up by the Birmingham and killed in the Great Explosion. And then these are other stories about Lady Gulf, which is a resounding American victory, and they're great books written about Lady Gulf that give a lot of the detail about the death of the Princeton. This is a picture or this is actually a picture, but this is the actual flag that mothers would put in their windows that showed that they had a serving son, mostly sons, but some daughters, but if they were alive, they had a blue star. If they had a gold star, it meant that their child had died in the war. And this was the actual one that my grandmother, Doreen Manget, had in her window when Dad was flying in the Pacific. That's another recent picture of a F-4U Corsair, which Dad didn't fly in the Pacific, but he flew a lot of them, ferrying them back and forth after the war was over. This is something that I was real proud of. This is a drawing that they did in the induction of Dad into the Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame, which I nominated him for. He was an airport manager for a number of years, and also a very distinguished air combat pilot in the Navy Aviators in Georgia at Warner Robins Air Force Base in Warner Robins, Georgia. And we went down to the banquet. Admiral Bruce Black and Margie came, and Tom and John and their beautiful wives came, and Mom, and they had a table, and Dad was inducted with 3 other Georgia-based or Georgia-connected pilots. And it's a picture of him. This is a Corsair that he used to ferry, and that's a F-9F Pantajet. And they have a metal reproduction of this portrait of Dad in his captain's uniform. He stayed in the Navy Reserves and retired as a captain down there. And they also have some memorabilia that Mom put together, his old uniform and his helmet and some other things that were on display down there at the Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame. One last thing I wanted to show, I was named for 2 Fred Mangets. This is the one that I have the exact name for, Frederick Daniel Manget. He was a cousin of Dad's, who was killed about 6 weeks before VE Day in Europe. He was a glider pilot that flew the big Horsa glider, and he had served in North Africa and Sicily, and then his unit was ferrying troops when the American armies crossed the Rhine in March of 1945, and he landed his plane in an area that had active German soldiers, and there was an active German machine gun nest, and he was killed. He was about 3 or 4 years older than Dad, so he was in his early 20s. He's buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten, the Netherlands. Mom and I went over to Dusseldorf on a trip a couple of years ago that she was working, and we took the train to Aachen and then a bus right to the cemetery, which is right across the border in the Netherlands, and that's a picture of me at Frederick's grave. He has no family left. He had another brother who died in an aircraft crash after the war. Didn't have any children, and he had another brother who was a doctor in Atlanta who he and his wife didn't have any children. So there's no one left in that branch of the Mangets. So we went over there with the idea that we do remember him and appreciate his sacrifice, and those of all the other boys that were killed in that area. It's a beautiful cemetery. This is the last wall in the barroom, and it has just a couple of memories and stories associated with it. One of them is some artifacts from Navajo artists from a great trip that we all made when Felice was about 12 years old, Felice?
Something like that.
Yeah, to Farmington and southern Colorado, and to visit Bruce Black and Margie Black. And we went out there and had a wonderful time. This little figure is a Navajo figure from Navajo mythology called Kokopelli. And Bruce, years ago, had bought some land on a bluff overlooking, I think, the San Juan River in Farmington, right outside Farmington. And he'd hired a couple of out-of-work miners to basically dig out a hole on the side of this bluff, on the side of this cliff that he was planning on making into his office. He had a petroleum geology consulting business out there. And he never did do that, but then he decided about that time to turn that into a bed and breakfast, and he did, and we went out there when it was almost complete. And it is amazing. It's still running. I think my cousin, Buzz, Bruce Jr., is managing it for Bruce and Margie, and it is a spectacular, one of those funny hotels that you can find featured in all sorts of travel magazines. The only other thing here of interest is the one hole-in-one that we've ever gotten. I made it up at the Bentry Golf Course when we were there, and there's the ball. Other than that, just a memorabilia, a lot of notebooks that have details about some of the history of our family and history of Mom's family, and sort of adventures that we've all done together. I inherited some beautiful Japanese artifacts from my grandfather, Tom Watkins, who passed away in 1985 and left a lot of his collection from right after World War II, and he was stationed there in the Army, to my mother and to her sister Margie Black. And then when Mom passed away, I got a good bit of them because I'd always been interested in Japanese culture. And these are ivory figurines that Papa brought back with him from Japan. Some of them are wonderfully exquisite bits of Japanese artistry and craft. There are also 2 or 3 of the ivory carvings called netskis, which were used to fasten some of the old archaic Japanese kimonos and sashes. They have some of those in there as well. My favorite piece is this samurai warrior. You could tell he's a samurai warrior because he had 2 swords. Only the samurai were allowed to have 2 swords. And it's exquisite from a piece of ivory. And the other piece that is remarkable is this piece with the fisherman in the net. You can see there's not a flaw in that entire net. Every little bit of netting is carved, and there are no holes or anything else in it. And it just astonished my grandfather about the care to detail and the artisan nature of these. So the plan is to keep it as long as we can in the family. You can probably find somebody that can buy it, but it's so beautiful. We've always kept it in the family. These are some of the other Japanese artifacts that my grandfather Tom Watkins brought back from Japan in the 1940s. This is another exquisite ivory carving that was his favorite, his personal favorite. It's a Shinto priest, and the reason he liked it so much is the expression on his face. It was extremely calm, reflective, and Zen-like in Japanese tradition. He also brought back a number of Japanese woodcut prints. These 2 are from a very famous Japanese printmaker from the 18th and 19th century named Hokusai. And Hokusai is well known because he had a print that's been reproduced in the United States. It's called The Great Wave. It's a big wave that's crashing on a shipping boat. These 2 are part of a series that he did called, I believe, the 36 Views of Mount Fuji. And we have 2 here and 2 on the other wall. And they were all pictures of life around Tokyo. Years ago when Hokusai was making these prints, and Mount Fujiyama is in all of them. There's Fujiyama here and Fujiyama there, and a lot of them are set around the water. We have others that Mom and Dad brought back from times when Dad was in the Korean War, these, and the one up here. We have no idea whether they're valuable or not, whether they're cheap reproductions or not, but Hokusai is very famous. There's another print on the other side that I've been able to identify by a printmaker called Utamaro, and some others that we have no idea who they are. I'm in the process of trying to find out who they are and if there is any particular value or scarcity to them. The other things, though, that are interesting are the Japanese samurai swords that are in this case that Papa brought back from Japan. That's some beautiful artwork, especially if you enjoy Japanese artistry and the sword making. they come from various eras in Japanese sword making, but the one with the ribbed sword sheath and the kind of the golden handle was dated by Japanese sword experts to the 1300s. So it's a very old, and we think they're not national Japanese treasures, which some of the swords are, but they are very old and certainly valuable to collectors. We're now in another room at Arbordale Avenue that we call the War Room, because there's so many military related things that I've inherited and enjoy very much looking at. The shadow box up here is some of my father's decorations and patches from his squadrons, and a picture of him and his ribbons. We also have his medals. He received 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, which is that top one under his wings, and 5 air medals, and then a meritorious medal with a V for valor, all for combat related things. The rest are battle ribbons that he collected in his tours. And those are pictures of him, one on the deck of the Bonhomme Richard in the Korean War. And then down below we have some other pictures, a lot of Civil War related things, including some mini balls, which are the conical shaped bullets from Civil War battlefields there, and then down here. This model of an FB-111 is one that I won as a outstanding cadet of some type in Air Force ROTC at Georgia. It's really cool. Its wings has variable geometry wings.
That's cool.
Anyway, I like that, so I put it there. And then we have some more pictures. This is an interesting thing. This belonged to Dad. This is a Japanese rice bowl. When Dad was in World War II, his squadron was based at Henderson Field in Guadalcanal. And in the sound across from Guadalcanal, there had been battles fought for several years with the Japanese Navy, and there were a lot of sunken ships. It was called Iron Bottom Sound because there were so many ships, American and Japanese, sunk there. And Dad was stationed on Henderson Field before getting on the Princeton, and a Navy diver who had been down to look at or collect information or something from one of the Japanese, I think it was a Japanese destroyer that was at the bottom on Iron Bottom Sound, brought up this rice bowl. And it's a Japanese rice bowl that the Japanese Navy would have eaten rice out of before the ship was sunk by U.S. action. And then we have various photographs. This is a picture of Dad on the Princeton that we always liked a lot, and some other pictures and whatnot. This is his Navy captain's hat, and this is my Army colonel's hat. And then down below, also inherited from my grandfather, are some of these really interesting pistols. This is a pistol that has the initials here, SC, Samuel Colt. This is a Colt pistol, one of the first revolving pistols. Still acts like it's, almost usable. It dates from the probably about 1850 or so. This is a dragoon pistol, a flintlock, probably dating from Revolutionary War era, late 1700s, maybe early 1800s. All of these are ones that my grandfather collected. This one is an Algerian rat tail pistol with a silver alloy and a cast iron barrel, probably Albanian in origin, around the Mediterranean, at least according to the book on pistols that I have over there. And then this is a late model pistol that uses instead of a flintlock, it has a pressure plate that you would still load it this way, but it would hit this pin right there and ignite the charge rather than have a flint. Some of these things seem to be almost usable. You could fill them full of gunpowder and bullets, and it seems like they might work. And then this belonged to Papa as well. This is a about circa 1870 cavalry saber. It's not sharpened, but it would have been deployed like this with the cavalry. Probably my grandfather got it when he was stationed at Fort Bliss, which Fort Bliss is still there. During the 1800s, it was a big cavalry base, and it had a museum there when we were living in El Paso with all sorts of cavalry-related things, boots and swords and pistols, dating from the Indian Wars after the Civil War, and a lot of Indian artifacts as well. And we call this room the War Room because there's so much military memorabilia here, including some real non-reproduction, original newspaper headlines from the Atlanta newspapers. These two are from Pearl Harbor. This is the 2-3 days later when Germany declared war on the United States. And then this one is when the Japanese surrendered after the atomic bombs were dropped. They were kept by my grandmother from the actual dates that they were published. We found them wrapped up in white butcher paper in the basement of my mom and dad's house when we were cleaning stuff out of that house. And I just was entranced by them. So I had them framed and put them up on the wall here. These are family portraits that I wanted to at least record so everybody knows who they are. This is my grandmother, Helen Lockhart Watkins. This is my grandfather, Tom Watkins, near the end of his life. When they got married, they went up to the altar, and the best man was a friend of Papa's from Georgia Tech, whose first name was Manget, last name was Davis. And my grandmother and Papa went up to the front of the church, and the ceremony was held, and they were made man and wife. And then they stepped down, and my grandmother's sister, Elizabeth Lockhart, and Manget Davis, who was known as Uncle Red, they stepped up to everyone else's surprise and got married at a double wedding. We have a very charming clipping about how it surprised everybody because they had kept it a secret. Uncle Red was kin to the Mangets through a Manget line, and then married my grandmother's sister. So we were kin to Uncle Red, the Davises, Manget Davis and Malcolm Davis, through both their mother and their father. This is a picture of Leslie at our wedding, and she is wearing my mother, Toy Manget's wedding dress that was provided by my grandfather and made especially for her out of silk that he had purchased in Japan. He was in Japan at the time, and Mom and Dad got married in 1947. The wedding dress was then worn by my Aunt Margie when she married Bruce Black, and then it was worn by Felice when she got married. And it's still lovely and in good condition with whoever's next. Then this is a picture of, this is Leslie's senior class picture, I think from high school. This is my grandmother Manget, Doreen Ingram Manget. She was a nurse when this was taken, or a nurse trainee. This is Leslie's mom, Joy Roby Black. This is a picture of her as a young lady. This is a picture of her when we met her, and knew her for a long time when they lived in Destin, Florida, and in Georgia. These portraits, that's Leslie's dad, Charles, who was one of his first Army assignments was in the Corps of Engineers, and he was one of the original Army aviation members. He's a member of their sort of Hall of Fame. Leslie, my wife, was born at Fort Rucker, Alabama, home of Army aviation. And then this is Leslie's mom, Joy, when she was young and probably about the time they met. This is a picture of my dad right after he was commissioned and got his wings. And this is a formal portrait of my mother. We think she was about 16 or 17 in this portrait.
Cheers.
Cheers.
It's a good video. You're an interesting person.
I used to be.